In terms of the sort of looking at these three populations, the Arabs, the Persians, and the Turks, again, in that kind of way, we shouldn't do national characters, but we do. You know, there is some power to these national portrait studies. What strikes me about the Persians, if the Turks are indeed very earnest, I think the Persians were extremely creative.
Yes.
You know, I think of one of these great scholars. England was blessed with many of them, as we know. E.G. Browne, who was, of course, the scholar on Persia.
Right.
He had this wonderful description, and he said, Persia is a hotbed of philosophical system. It's a hotbed of philosophical system. That the Persians have argued philosophy. They argued metaphysics. They were deeper. There were more layers to Persian civilization and to Persian identity than there were either in the case of the Arabs or the case of the Turks. Is that wrong, or?
No, I would agree with that up to a point. I mean, when the Arabs came out of Arabia in the 7th century and conquered all these countries of ancient civilization, the previous identities were totally lost.
Right.
I mean, Egypt, after all, was the home of a very ancient civilization going back millennia. The Egyptian language survived for a little while in the form of a Coptic dialect, then disappeared. The Babylonian past was obliterated. Only in Iran, they didn't preserve much, but they did preserve a separate sense of identity. They did preserve their language to some degree. They were not Arabized as the Iraqis and the Syrians and the Egyptians were. They still have a different language, full of Arabic loanwords, Islamized, written in the Arabic script, but still Persian. And in that sense, I think and of course, although they had forgotten their history, they had a very rich mythology to replace it.
Right, right. Now the Turks are without that historical depth. Is that fair enough?
I think so, yes.
I mean, do the Turks know that? Does it bother? I mean, is there a kind of, because my impression, correct me on this one, is that the Arabs and the Turks and the Iranians don't know each other very well.
I think that's true.
You know, by and large, their dialogue has been with the West.
Yes.
Each one. I mean,
yes, you're right. They don't know each other very well.
You know, the Arabs, for example, they decided to do something very interesting with their 4 centuries in the bosom of the Ottoman world.
Yeah.
They decided it was a time of darkness. False, but that was the new nationalist historiography.
Yeah. Well, if you look at the literature from the period of the great Turco-Persian rivalry,
right,
from the 16th century onwards for a while, Turkey and Iran were the 2 great powers of the Middle East, contesting supremacy. And they generally write about each other in very insulting terms.
Right.
I mean, the Iranians, speaking of the Turks, refer to them as Atrak, Napak, Bi-Idrak. Atrak is the Arabic plural.
Right.
Napak, impure.
Right.
Bi-Idrak, without understanding.
Right. So that's the image that they have of them.
Yes.
Yes.
The rhymed insult is very popular in that part of the world.
So these populations really don't quite know. I mean, the way they've spent a lot of time defining their identity and their grievances against the West.
Right.
But
that's not modern, of course.
That's modern. That is modern.
Previously, the religious identity was the all-important one.
Yes.
And within the religious identity, it was dynastic.
Yes.
The state of which you were a subject.
Right.
The ruler to whom you owed allegiance.
Yes.